3 nights before my 70th birthday, my late wife Eleanor appeared at the foot of our bed in Kelowna and spoke words that would save my life. "Harold, listen to me carefully. Do not drink the wine your daughter and her husband are bringing you. Promise me, Harold. Do not drink that wine." I woke, gasping for air, my flannel pajamas soaked through despite the cool British Columbia autumn night. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 inches pale blue numbers. Eleanor had been gone for 3 years now, taken by pancreatic cancer that moved faster than any of us could have imagined. Yet there she had stood, as vivid as our wedding day 46 years ago, her silver hair catching moonlight, those gentle gray eyes burning with an urgency I had never seen in her during our decades together. Before we continue with this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments below. I am curious to know how many of you have experienced those moments when something beyond explanation tried to warn you about danger hiding in plain sight. I sat up in the darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house on Lakeshore Road creaked with familiar sounds, the old bones of a home Eleanor and I had built together 35 years ago when Kelowna was still a quiet orchard town. Through the window, Okanagan Lake stretched silver under the stars, peaceful and eternal. Yet nothing felt peaceful anymore. 2 weeks earlier, my daughter Meredith and her husband Grant had arrived from Vancouver for an extended visit. They had brought with them a case of wine from a prestigious Niagara winery, presented with great ceremony at our kitchen table. "For your birthday, Dad," Meredith had announced, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer clothes, speaking of a lifestyle I had helped finance over the years. "Grant picked this vintage specifically. It is supposed to be extraordinary." Grant had nodded with that charming smile he had perfected over his 15 years of marriage to my daughter. "This particular wine needs to breathe for at least a week before drinking, Harold. We will open it at your birthday dinner. Trust me, you have never tasted anything like it." Now, in the pre-dawn darkness, their insistence seemed different. Why had Grant been so specific about the timing? Why had Meredith mentioned 3 separate times that I absolutely must be the one to taste it first, as the guest of honor? Why had they both watched so intently as I carried the case to my wine cellar? I padded down the hallway toward the kitchen, passing photographs that documented our family history. Eleanor holding newborn Meredith, my son Daniel's graduation from Queen's University, grandchildren at Christmas dinners spanning decades of what I had believed was genuine happiness. At the sink, I filled a glass with water from the tap, but even the familiar taste of Kelowna's mountain-fed water supply could not wash away the metallic fear coating my tongue. 46 years of marriage had taught me to trust Eleanor's instincts, even when they defied all logic. She had warned me about the contractor who later disappeared with deposits from half the neighborhood. She had insisted I get a second opinion on my prostate exam, catching early-stage cancer that might have killed me. She had convinced me to hold off on a real estate investment that collapsed 6 months later. Eleanor had possessed intuition that bordered on something I could not explain, an ability to sense danger that I had learned to trust completely. Even death, it seemed, had not diminished that gift. When morning came, I tried to push the dream away, but Eleanor's voice kept echoing through my mind as I made my way downstairs. The aroma of coffee and bacon filled the kitchen where Meredith was preparing what she called a special Sunday breakfast. Grant stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, while Meredith arranged fresh fruit on our good china. "Good morning, Dad," Meredith said, kissing my cheek as I entered. "You look tired. Did you sleep all right?" "Fine," I lied, settling into my chair at the head of the table. "Just excited about the birthday, I suppose." Grant set a plate before me with a flourish. 70 years young in 3 days, Harold. We should start celebrating now. He poured me orange juice from a fresh pitcher, his movements smooth and confident. "Speaking of which, that wine should be perfectly aged by Friday. I cannot wait for you to experience it." Something in his tone made my fork pause over my eggs. There was an insistence there, a pressure that felt wrong coming from my son-in-law. In 15 years, Grant had never shown particular interest in my preferences for anything, let alone wine. Meredith leaned forward, her manicured fingers drumming against the oak table Eleanor had chosen when we first built this house. "You are going to love it, Dad." Grant researched for months to find the perfect vintage. The winemaker uses a very special process that is supposed to bring out incredible depth of flavor. "I'm sure it will be wonderful. I replied carefully, watching their reactions. My phone buzzed, displaying my son Daniel's name. I welcomed the interruption, stepping toward the window that overlooked the lake. "Hey, son. Happy almost birthday, Dad." Daniel's warm voice eased some of the tension in my chest. "Sophie and I are driving up from Calgary on Thursday. The kids have been asking about Grandpa's lake house since Labor Day." I chuckled, picturing my 8-year-old granddaughter Emma and 6-year-old grandson Marcus. "Tell them Grandpa has the fishing rods already." Sarah wanted me to ask about dress code for the dinner Friday. Should I bring a suit? "Just business casual, nothing fancy. It is only family." As I hung up, I caught Meredith and Grant exchanging a look. Brief, barely a second, but something passed between them that made my stomach clench. "Everything all right with Daniel?" Grant asked, his tone carefully casual. "Fine. They will be here Thursday." I studied my son-in-law's face. When had those worry lines appeared around his eyes? When had his smile started looking so forced? Meredith cleared her throat. "Dad, about that wine? Grant wants to make sure it is stored properly. He should probably check on it today, maybe move it to a specific temperature zone." There it was again, that underlying pressure, that insistence, feeling more like a demand than a request. In 35 years of being Meredith's father, I had never heard her speak with such urgency about something as simple as wine storage. "I'm sure it's fine where it is," I said. "The cellar stays at a constant temperature year-round." Grant's shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly. Meredith's smile seemed to freeze at the edges. After they left for a supposed hiking trip to Knox Mountain, the house fell silent, and that is when Eleanor's warning began to feel less like a dream and more like a premonition. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Each tick of the grandfather clock Eleanor had inherited from her grandmother echoed through the empty rooms. Daniel would not arrive until Thursday, and the birthday dinner was not until Friday. Days of solitude filled with nothing but my wife's persistent warning. By 2 o'clock, I could not stand it anymore. The walk to the basement wine cellar felt longer than usual. Eleanor and I had built this space together, installed the climate control, chosen the racks that now held bottles from our travels across Canada and beyond. The familiar musty smell of aged wood and cork should have been comforting, but today it only sharpened my unease. The case of wine sat where I'd placed it 2 weeks ago, on the center table under the main light. 6 bottles of 2018 Niagara ice wine, an expensive gift that should have filled me with gratitude. The labels were elegant, the bottles sealed with professional precision. So why did looking at them make my skin crawl? I lifted one bottle carefully, examining it in the light. The seal appeared intact, the label genuine. But as I turned the bottle slowly, something caught my attention. The cork sat slightly lower than it should, almost imperceptibly, as if the bottle had been opened and recorked. My heart began pounding as I examined the other bottles. Each one showed the same subtle sign. A cork that sat perhaps a millimeter too deep, the kind of detail you would miss unless you were specifically looking. I had been in the construction business for 40 years before retirement. My company, Harrison Construction, had built half the commercial buildings in the Okanagan Valley. Attention to detail had been my specialty, catching flaws that others missed, identifying problems before they became disasters. Someone had tampered with these bottles. Someone had opened them, added something, and resealed them with near-perfect precision. I stood in the cellar, surrounded by bottles Eleanor and I had collected over decades of marriage, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Was I losing my mind? Was grief and age making me paranoid about a perfectly normal gift from my daughter? But Eleanor's voice whispered through my memory with absolute clarity. "Do not drink that wine, Harold." In 46 years of marriage, my wife had never steered me wrong. Not once. I needed to know what was in those bottles, but I had no idea who to call. Then I remembered someone, Dr. Catherine Mercer, a toxicologist at UBC Okanagan, who had testified as an expert witness on a contamination case involving one of my construction sites years ago. We had stayed in touch casually, the way professionals do when their paths cross unexpectedly. I drove to the university with 2 of the wine bottles secured in a cooler bag, my hands steady on the wheel even as my mind raced with horrible possibilities. Catherine met me in her laboratory, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Harold, this is unexpected. It has been, 5 years? Catherine, I need your help." The words tumbled out in a rush. I found something, and I think someone is trying to hurt me." Her expression shifted from surprise to professional concern. "What kind of something?" "Wine. A gift from my daughter and son-in-law. But the bottles have been opened and resealed. Something has been added." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Bring them to my lab station. Let us take a look." The next hour felt like an eternity as Catherine worked with methodical precision, extracting samples, running them through various instruments, occasionally making notes on her tablet. I sat in the corner of her lab, watching the late afternoon sun slant through the windows, trying to imagine any innocent explanation for what I had discovered. Finally, she looked up from her computer screen, her face pale beneath the fluorescent lighting. "Harold," she said quietly, "this wine has been contaminated with ethylene glycol, antifreeze, essentially. A significant amount, carefully measured to be masked by the wine's sweetness." The words hit me like physical blows. What would it do, consumed at this concentration, over the course of a meal with multiple glasses? She paused, clearly struggling with what she had to tell me. Initial symptoms would appear within hours: nausea, confusion, drowsiness. It would look like overindulgence, perhaps a bad reaction to mixing medications with alcohol. By the time severe symptoms appeared, kidney failure, acidosis, it would be too late. Death within 24 to 48 hours, and it could easily be mistaken for acute alcohol poisoning or a sudden medical emergency. "Someone tried to poison me," I heard myself say. "My own daughter and her husband tried to poison me." Catherine reached for her phone. "Harold, we need to call the RCMP immediately." Detective Sergeant Patricia Blackwood arrived at Catherine's lab within the hour, accompanied by a younger officer who took notes while she asked questions. Blackwood was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that spoke of decades in law enforcement. "Mr. Harrison," she said after reviewing Catherine's findings, "before we go further, I need you to know that your son-in-law, Grant Thornton, has been under investigation by our Financial Crimes Unit for the past 4 months." The words hit like a second punch. "What do you mean?" Blackwood settled across from me, her expression grave. "Grant Thornton has been running a sophisticated investment fraud scheme through his wealth management firm in Vancouver. He has defrauded clients of over $12 million, money that has disappeared into offshore accounts. When the scheme began collapsing 3 months ago, his debts to certain organized crime figures exceeded $4 million. $4 million. I stared at her, unable to process it. "Grant handles my investment portfolio. Has for 10 years. We are aware. Your accounts were among the first he drained, Mr. Harrison. Your retirement savings, the proceeds from selling Harrison Construction, your property investments, gone. Over $2.8 million. My vision blurred. Everything I had worked for, everything Eleanor and I had built together, stolen by the man I had trusted with my family's future. Your life insurance policy," Blackwood continued gently. "How much is it worth?" $3 million, I whispered. "Meredith is the primary beneficiary." "There it is." Blackwood's voice carried the weight of certainty. "With you dead, your daughter inherits enough to pay off Grant's debts with money to spare. A 70-year-old man dying at his birthday dinner after drinking too much wine would raise no suspicions, especially with your history of heart medication." The pieces fell into sickening place. The expensive gift, the insistence on specific storage conditions, the careful planning around my birthday celebration. If the poison had worked, I would have collapsed at my own party, surrounded by witnesses to my apparent good health moments before my fatal reaction. "What about Meredith?" I asked, dreading the answer. Blackwood's expression darkened. "That is where this becomes complicated. We believe Grant is the architect of this scheme, but your daughter's involvement is unclear. She may be a willing participant, or she may be under his control through threats or manipulation. Either way, we need to approach this carefully. What do you suggest?" "We catch them in the act. Your birthday dinner proceeds as planned, but with modifications. The original wine remains in your cellar, but you will not drink it. When they realize their plan has failed, they will likely panic and reveal themselves. You want me as bait. You will be completely safe. Undercover officers will be positioned throughout your home. The moment either of them shows suspicious behavior, we move in." I sat in that laboratory, surrounded by equipment that had just saved my life, trying to imagine facing my daughter across a dinner table knowing she might have planned to watch me die. The next 3 days passed in a surreal haze. Grant and Meredith returned from their hiking trip with bright smiles and excited chatter about Friday's celebration. They had no idea that every word they spoke, every gesture they made, was being watched and recorded. Daniel arrived Thursday evening with his wife Sophie and the grandchildren. I held Emma and Marcus tighter than usual, breathing in their innocent joy while my heart broke with the knowledge of what their aunt and uncle had planned. "You okay, Dad?" Daniel asked quietly as we stood on the deck watching the sunset over the lake. "You seem distracted." "Just getting old, son. 70 hits different than 60 did." He squeezed my shoulder. "Mom would have loved this, all of us together for your birthday." I thought about Eleanor's warning, about her reaching across death itself to protect me. "She is here," I said. "In her own way, she is here." Friday arrived with crisp October sunshine, the house filled with the sounds of family as we prepared for dinner. Grant took charge of the kitchen with his usual confidence, preparing an elaborate meal while Meredith supervised table settings and decorations. Daniel and Sophie kept the grandchildren occupied in the backyard, their laughter drifting through open windows. At precisely 6 o'clock, Detective Blackwood's undercover officers took their positions. One posed as a delivery person, briefly at the door. Another sat in an unmarked vehicle on the street. A third monitored feeds from discreetly placed cameras throughout the main floor. Grant emerged from the kitchen with ceremonial flourish, carrying the wine bottles I had examined 3 days earlier. "Time to open the birthday wine, Harold. I have been waiting for this moment for weeks." Something flickered in his eyes as he spoke. Anticipation, certainly. But beneath it, something harder and colder. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I have been fighting heartburn all day. Dr. Morrison suggested I avoid wine for a few days, especially the sweet varieties." The change was subtle but unmistakable. Confusion followed by something like panic. "But Harold," Grant said, recovering quickly, "this is a special vintage. I had it shipped specifically for tonight. Surely one glass would not hurt?" Meredith stepped forward, her smile now painted on. "Dad, we chose this wine especially for you. Grant spent months researching the perfect bottle. It would mean so much if you would at least taste it." "Perhaps later," I said, watching as they exchanged a worried glance. "Let us enjoy the meal first." Dinner proceeded with surface normalcy, but the tension beneath was palpable. Grant repeatedly steered conversation toward the wine, suggesting we should open it with dessert, with coffee, after the grandchildren went to bed. Each time, I deflected. By 9 o'clock, Emma and Marcus were asleep upstairs, and the adults gathered in the living room. Grant's agitation had become impossible to hide. He excused himself twice for business calls, returning each time more visibly stressed. "Dad," Meredith said during a lull in conversation, "I really think you should try that wine now. Grant went to such trouble, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste." Daniel looked between his sister and me with growing confusion. "What is going on? You two have been pushing that wine all night like it is medicine or something." "It is nothing," Grant said quickly. "Just want Harold to enjoy his gift." That is when I made my decision. The moment had come to end this charade. I stood slowly, drawing everyone's attention. "Actually, there is something I need to say." Grant's face went pale. Meredith gripped the arm of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. 3 nights ago, your mother came to me in a dream." I looked at Daniel, then at Meredith. "She warned me not to drink the wine you brought. She was very specific, very insistent." "Dad," Meredith laughed nervously, "that is just grief playing tricks. Mom has been gone 3 years. So I examined the bottles," I continued, ignoring her protest. Every single one had been opened and resealed. I took them to a toxicologist at UBC. Grant shot to his feet. "Harold, you are clearly confused. The stress of turning 70, losing Eleanor, ethylene glycol." The word stopped him cold. Antifreeze. Enough to kill me slowly over the course of the evening. I would have collapsed at my own birthday dinner, and everyone would have thought it was a heart attack or alcohol poisoning. The room went absolutely silent. Daniel stared at his sister with dawning horror. Sophie clutched her husband's arm, her face white. "That is insane," Grant sputtered. "You cannot seriously believe." 4 months. I cut him off, pulling out my phone and pressing play on a video Blackwood had provided. That is how long the RCMP has been investigating your investment fraud. 12 million stolen from clients. 4 million owed to people who collect debts with violence. And 2.8 million of my retirement savings gone. The blood drained from Grant's face as his own voice filled the room, recorded during a phone conversation with his organized crime creditors, discussing timelines and payment plans. $3 million, I continued. That is what my life insurance is worth. With me dead, Meredith inherits enough to pay your debts and still have money left over. It was his idea. Meredith's voice cracked as tears began streaming down her face. Grant told me you were going to cut us out of your will anyway. He said you were giving everything to Daniel because of some argument you had. He said this was the only way to save us. Meredith, shut up. Grant lunged toward her, but it was too late. He threatened to leave me. Said I would lose everything, the house, the cars, everything. I did not want to hurt you, Dad. I swear I just... RCMP. Detective Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos as she and two uniformed officers entered through the kitchen. Grant Thornton, Meredith Harrison Thornton, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Grant did not resist as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, but his eyes never left mine. You should have just drunk the wine, old man, he hissed. Would have been easier for everyone. Meredith collapsed, sobbing as an officer read her rights. Daddy, please. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I never meant... Save it for your lawyer, Blackwood said, guiding her toward the door. Daniel stood frozen, his arm around Sophie, watching his sister being led away in handcuffs. Dad, he whispered. I had no idea. I swear I had no idea. I know, son. I pulled him into an embrace, feeling his shoulders shake with silent sobs. None of this is your fault. The house felt enormous after the police left, taking Grant and Meredith to the RCMP detachment in downtown Kelowna. Daniel and Sophie sat with me in the living room, while the grandfather clock marked the hours past midnight. What happens now? Sophie asked quietly. I do not know, I admitted. I honestly do not know. 3 months later, I sat in the British Columbia Supreme Court watching my daughter receive her sentence. Meredith had pleaded guilty to conspiracy in exchange for testimony against Grant, whose trial had resulted in conviction on multiple counts of fraud and attempted murder. Meredith Harrison Thornton, the judge pronounced, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal custody. Grant received 22 years. Meredith turned to look at me before the guards led her away. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on a frame that had lost weight during the legal proceedings. Our eyes met, and I saw the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knees, who had built snow forts in our backyard, who had danced with me at her wedding. I'm sorry, Daddy, she whispered. I nodded once, unable to speak. The weeks following were the darkest since losing Eleanor. Daniel insisted I move to Calgary temporarily, staying in their guest room while Sophie made sure I ate properly, and the grandchildren reminded me that life continued despite everything. Grandpa, Emma said one evening, climbing onto my lap with a picture book. Mommy says Aunt Meredith did something bad and has to go away for a while. That is right, sweetheart. Are you sad? I thought about the question carefully. Yes, I am sad, but I am also grateful. Grateful for what? For you, for Marcus, for your daddy and mommy, for this family. She hugged me with the fierce certainty of childhood. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Emma. 6 months after the sentencing, I drove to the Fraser Valley Institution for Women, where Meredith was serving her time. The visiting room was gray and institutional, filled with families speaking in low voices across bolted-down tables. Meredith looked older than her 44 years, her hair pulled back simply, her face bare of the careful makeup she had always worn. When she saw me, tears immediately began falling. Dad, I did not think you would come. Neither did I admitted, sitting across from her. We sat in silence for several minutes before she spoke again. Grant convinced me you were dying anyway, that the cancer had come back and you were hiding it from us. He said we would lose everything when the medical bills ate through your estate, that this way at least we would have something. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. Her voice cracked. It is easier to justify something terrible when you tell yourself there is no other choice. But there is always another choice. I know that now. I studied my daughter's face, searching for the woman I thought I knew. Do you understand what you almost did? You almost made Emma and Marcus accessories to their grandfather's murder. They would have drunk wine at my birthday dinner, maybe eaten food prepared in the same kitchen where Grant handled that poison. Meredith broke down completely. I know. God, I know. I think about it every night. I will never forgive myself, but I forgive you. She looked up, disbelief written across her tear-stained face. How? How can you possibly forgive me after what I did? Because you are still my daughter. Because forgiveness is not about what you deserve. It is about what I choose to carry with me for whatever years I have left. And I choose not to carry hatred. The drive back to Kelowna felt longer than usual, winding through the Fraser Canyon as autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson. I stopped at a rest area overlooking the Thompson River, sitting on a bench while the water rushed past below. Thank you, Eleanor, I said aloud. Thank you for saving me. The wind stirred the leaves around me, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I caught the scent of her perfume, lavender and vanilla, the combination she had worn for 46 years. Today, 2 years later, I still live in our house on Lakeshore Road. The wine cellar has been converted into a workshop where I build furniture for the grandchildren who visit every summer and most holidays. Daniel brought his family up for my 72nd birthday last month. We had cake and ice cream on the deck, watching the sunset paint Okanagan Lake in shades of gold and pink. Emma is 10 now, interested in everything from astronomy to zoology. Marcus just turned 8 and has developed a passion for fishing that reminds me of myself at his age. I write to Meredith monthly and visit when health permits. She has been a model prisoner, participating in counseling programs and vocational training. With good behavior, she may be eligible for parole in another 4 years. I do not know what kind of relationship we will have then, but I know I want to try. Grant remains in maximum security, his appeals denied, his debts to dangerous people now irrelevant behind prison walls. I think about him sometimes, wondering how someone could become so corrupted by greed that murder seemed like a reasonable solution. I will probably never understand. Looking back on this experience, I realize how close I came to losing everything. Not just my life, but my faith in family, my ability to trust, my capacity for love. For 70 years, I believed that blood guaranteed loyalty, that the people closest to us would always protect us from harm. I was wrong about that. But I was also wrong to think that betrayal has to destroy you. Eleanor taught me many things during our 46 years together. How to listen, how to forgive, how to find joy in simple moments. But her final lesson, delivered from beyond the grave, was perhaps the most important. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to warnings. And never assume that familiar faces cannot harbor unfamiliar darkness. The human spirit is remarkably resilient, with hope, determination, and the support of those who truly love us. We can survive betrayals that should have broken us, and rebuild lives from the ashes of trust destroyed. If you are facing your own moment of impossible choice right now, remember this: you are not alone. There are people who love you genuinely, who would never harm you, who want to see you thrive. Find them, hold on to them, let them help you through. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your own experiences with family trust or the unexplainable warnings that protected you. Your story might save someone else's life. And if you connected with what I have shared today, please subscribe to Shattered Vengeance for more stories that remind us all how precious and fragile our relationships truly are.